Welcome to the conversation at airsafe.com. I'm your host, Todd Curtis. On August 23rd, 2021, I had a conversation with KIQI Radio in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we discussed several issues about current air travel, including the behavior of passengers on board aircraft, risk of COVID travel, and the recent decision by the United States government to use the Civil Reserve Air Fleet to supplement military aircraft evacuating people from Afghanistan.
Ahora vamos a hablar, Marcos, un poquito acerca de viajar en aviones, ¿no? Todo lo que involucra en este momento, que todo está un poco diferente, ¿verdad? Y hay hasta caos en el aire. Por eso es que hemos invitado a Todd Curtis. Él es de airsafe.com. Él es el experto en aviación y nos da mucho gusto tenerlo con nosotros. Good morning, Mr. Todd Curtis. How are you? Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. I have a few things we want to talk to you about this morning. Number one is now Pfizer has approved, the FDA has approved the Pfizer vaccine. It's no longer emergency use, so that might, make some people that were hesitant get the vaccine. And that takes me to this question. Do you see any foreseeable vaccine mandates in the near future for airplane travel?
I don't see it for airplane travel as much as I see it for airline employees. Now that there is at least one vaccine that is approved fully, some of the hesitation that individuals may have, and certainly corporations may have, may no longer be there. That is, there is something that has gone through the full process that most vaccines go through.
Uh-huh. Entonces yo le estoy preguntando ahora que el FDA aprobó la vacuna Pfizer completamente, ya no es para uso de emergencia, sino que completamente, si él ve en el futuro cercano de que todas las personas que viajan en avión tengan que estar vacunadas, él dice que no lo ve tanto para las personas que quieran viajar, sino que lo ve para los empleados de aviación. Ahora que esto fue aprobado, ¿por qué? Porque antes había resistencia, quizás esto ahora cambie de mente a algunos de los empleados y las corporaciones posiblemente empiecen a exigir vacunación. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about unruly passengers. What's behind all of this? Is this type of behavior always existed, or is this fairly new? Is this a new phenomenon?
This phenomenon certainly isn't new. People have been misbehaving on airplanes, even at the beginning of aviation's history. But in recent years, this sort of thing has not risen to the level where the government is increasing the level of fines and the number of fines, and certainly there's a lot more media attention because of all the stresses that have happened in the last few months when it comes to air travel.
Uh-huh. Entonces le estoy preguntando porque sabemos todos que hay mucho caos en el aire, personas hostiles, hay peleas, hay personas que tienen que ser sacadas de los aviones, hay personas que están siendo, Marcos, usado con el duct tape, los están amarrando a las sillas.
Not the duct tape treatment.
Duct tape treatment also. Dice que este fenómeno no es nada nuevo, que ha existido desde el comienzo de la historia de la aviación, pero en los años recientes el gobierno ha intervenido, hay más obviamente medios sociales donde podemos ver lo que está pasando en el aire, hay multas, hay personas que no van a poder viajar más, entonces en ese sentido sí ha cambiado algo. Are there air marshals on every flight, and when do they actually get involved when something like this happens?
Well, air marshals are on a few flights, relatively small percentage of total flights. Usually those flights that are associated with a higher risk of some sort of hijacking or sabotage. The common flight that we see people misbehaving on are typically not those flights. Many of the passenger misbehavior events are on domestic flights, the kind of flight that is a normal flight that anyone might take, business person, holiday traveler, not an overseas flight to, let's say, London or Tokyo or some other major capital. So even if the air marshals were on board, unless there's a threat to the aircraft or to the crew, a direct threat, they probably would not get involved.
They don't get involved unless it's like that's what I understood. I thought they got involved more, but they really don't. They kind of like assess the situation, right? So it depends on if there's a threat to the flight or to the crew. Dice, estoy preguntando acerca de los air marshals. Marcos, air marshals son personas vestidas de civil que viajan en los aviones y son realmente policías, son súper entrenados, se llaman air marshals. Dice que hay un porcentaje muy chiquito de ellos que viajan en vuelos y más bien en vuelos que tienen riesgo, que tienen corren riesgo quizás de sabotaje, quizás de secuestro, y ellos no se involucran realmente en mal comportamiento, a menos que los empleados, las azafatas estén en algún tipo de peligro o el avión esté en peligro, y más bien viajan a ciudades como Londres, Tokio o algún lugar donde creen que posiblemente pueda llegar a haber algún tipo de incidencia de este tipo, pero cuando estamos hablando de viajes así normales y corrientes, no tanto. And I also understand that they're going to, well, American Airlines at least is going to stop banning the sale of alcohol on coach. And that's, I guess, in hopes to maybe curtail the situation a little bit?
That will help it somewhat, but another set of problems, in addition to people drinking on the airplane, is people drinking before they get on the airplane, especially in your, let's just say your executive premier loungers. You might pay $20 or $30 or $50 or $60 to sit for a couple of hours before flying. Many of those offer as many drinks of, let's say, wine and beer as you can handle in several hours. And some people overconsume, and they misbehave once they get on the airplane.
Estaba leyendo yo que American Airlines, Marcos, está suspendiendo las ventas de alcohol en algunos de sus vuelos, bueno, en todos sus vuelos, ¿verdad? Para tratar de solucionar un poquito el problema, porque obviamente las personas que toman son las que peor se portan. Y dice que sí, puede ser que eso ayude un poquito, pero hay otro problema, que muchas personas ya suben al avión a haber tomado, ¿no? Hay lugares donde, por ejemplo, American y United tienen unas salas donde si tú pagas puedes entrar, descansar y tomar todo lo que quieres de alcohol. Entonces ya al entrar al avión ya como que estás un poquito alcoholizado.
I wonder if your organization gets into the numbers of people that travel, and if so, there was an uptick, and now is it going down because of the Delta, or are people saying, I just want to get into an airplane?
Well, worldwide, the number of people flying has gotten close to normal, and by normal I mean 2019, the last full year before the pandemic. It's not gotten all the way back, but I'd say it's about 70 to 90% of levels around the world. And certainly in the US, there are some routes that are very booked because during the pandemic, some planes and some pilots were no longer flying because there wasn't demand. The demand has risen faster than the ability to put airplanes and crews back in the air. So if you're flying, there may be fewer people flying overall in the United States, but the average plane is more packed with people.
Wow. And are they having a problem with also keeping their employees? Is that also a reason why there's so many cancellations?
Well, the employees at an airline could range anywhere from extremely professional, highly trained people like pilots and flight attendants to baggage handlers, gate agents, etc. And like the rest of society, when people face trouble during the pandemic, they may have had to switch jobs, change jobs, or the job just put them on furlough. And they have an alternative way of making a living now, and they may be reluctant to come back to work. So although they may have enough people to do the highly trained positions, flight attendants and pilots, there's a whole bunch of other people who may not be there at the airlines right now.
Right, and they're obviously needed. Y dice que mundialmente, Marco, hiciste la pregunta que si la gente seguía viajando durante estos tiempos de la pandemia, dice de que sí, de que ya han llegado a niveles normales, casi normales, de antes de que comenzara la pandemia en el 2019, 70% al 90% mundialmente. También la demanda ha aumentado, pero a veces como que los empleados faltan, ¿verdad? ¿Por qué? Porque durante la pandemia tuvieron que encontrar otros trabajos y es por eso que a veces hay demoras en los viajes como los que hemos estado escuchando. Let's talk about COVID and transmission on airplanes. What is the risk of a person contracting COVID on an airplane? I'm not talking about in the airport or driving to the airport or anything like that, but on the airplane itself.
The risk is low, but it's not zero. And from the few studies I've seen where they've actually seen some people who were infected and they did an investigation and found out that they were on a particular flight where they probably got infected, most of these people are sitting very close to an infected person. So although the airlines say that the air might be recirculated through filters and it's very, very small percentage of viruses would survive, it doesn't take that many viruses to infect someone. So if you're on an airplane, the risk is low. There are things you can do to protect yourself. One, wear the mask. Two, if you yourself feel that you're ill and shouldn't fly, don't fly. If you see someone next to you who you think is ill, You can ask the flight attendants to put you in another part of the airplane, or you can even ask before the airplane takes off to go to another flight if you think that you cannot be safe on that airplane.
Le estoy preguntando sobre el riesgo de poderse infectar en un avión. Dice que el riesgo es muy pequeño, pero no es cero, ¿verdad? Hay personas que quizás estén en un vuelo que están infectadas y obviamente a pesar de que el aire está filtrado constantemente, si estás sentado cerca de alguien, una persona que está contagiada, obviamente te puedes contagiar, pero tienes que usar tu máscara, obviamente es súper importante. Y si tú crees que alguien que está sentado al lado tuyo no está bien, puedes hablar a la camarera y exigir que te muevan a otra parte del avión y obviamente si te sientes mal, por favor no viajes.
Estamos hablando, damas y caballeros, con el señor Todd Curtis y ahora le voy a preguntar sobre lo que está pasando en Afganistán, a ver si él se sabe. The United States is using a program that was designed in the wake of the Berlin airlift after World War II, and that is to use commercial aircraft to augment airlift capacity. Does it take any particular presidential order, or do you know how this works? And who pays for these transfers? Is it the government, or do you have any information as to how it works?
Well, the Civil Reserve Air Fleet program, as you said, has been around for several decades. And although it's been used rarely, there have always been, during this program, a certain number of airplanes that are set aside for that. Now, in some cases, the aircraft might be strengthened in their floor, which makes it heavier and such, and they might be passenger aircraft with extra weight. The airlines might be compensated for all the years that they're flying this extra weight aircraft. In exchange for the government subsidies, the airlines are obligated to provide crews, usually voluntary, in fact always voluntary, and aircraft for this program. Now, as they've said in Washington, D.C., these aircraft will not be going to Afghanistan. They will not be facing hostile fire. They might be transferring people from Germany or the United Arab Emirates or Qatar to the United States or to other places.
Pues muy interesante porque, ¿verdad? Entramos en lo que está pasando allá en Afganistán y obviamente ustedes han de saber que, ¿verdad? Los Estados Unidos ahora está utilizando algunas de las compañías privadas de airlines, Delta, por ejemplo, American, Atlas Air, ¿verdad? Para no necesariamente sacar a las personas que están sacando de Afganistán, sino que la militar los está sacando de Afganistán, se los llevan a Alemania y a otras ciudades y luego de ahí están llevando a estas personas a un país tercero, porque ahora están pidiendo, ¿verdad?, que muchos de los que quieren venir a los Estados Unidos se vayan primero a un país tercero. Entonces yo le pregunto que quién paga. Interesante, ustedes han de recordar cuando las aerolíneas tuvieron sus problemas financieros, el gobierno les otorgó una gran cantidad de dinero para salvar el negocio, ¿no? Y entonces durante ese espacio, ¿verdad?, se firma un contrato en el cual, ¿verdad?, voluntariamente, la mayoría de los que van a recoger a la gente, los que están en el staff de los aviones, son voluntarios y las compañías están dispuestas y comprometidas a proveer este servicio en caso de emergencia que tenga los Estados Unidos, y eso es lo que está pasando en Afganistán.
And one last question for me is, I remember when you used to have to get a negative COVID test to fly to Hawaii. They've so far canceled that, but do you need a negative COVID test to re-enter the United States from any other country? Is that still in order?
I'm not aware of the current rules that the U.S. government has for re-entering the country, but I will say this. If you're planning on traveling, even within the United States, as you mentioned before, Hawaii did have rules. They've changed those rules. You can have states and cities implementing temporary rules for COVID-related travel in that they might require testing or quarantine. And especially if you go overseas, you not only have to worry about the requirements for entering a country, there might be requirements for exiting the country. And in the United States, whether or not there's a pandemic or not, when you're entering the country, if the Customs and Border Patrol officials determine that you might be a risk because of a health issue, you can be quarantined.
Exactamente, eso le estoy preguntando si cualquier persona que viene de otro país tiene que hacerse la prueba de COVID antes de reingresar a los Estados Unidos. Dice que no está realmente seguro cuáles países, si es que son todos, pero sí sabemos de que si usted entra al país y de alguna manera determinan que usted está enfermo, quizás se dan cuenta que no está bien, le hacen la prueba y usted sale positivo, le van a imponer la cuarentena, ¿verdad? Así que la cuestión es de que usted tenga mucho cuidado, esté preparado para cualquier eventualidad. Anything else you want to add that might be of importance for anyone that's planning a trip? Still, there's still some summer left and maybe some people are still planning a vacation.
I think the most important thing anyone can do who's thinking of traveling is to pay attention to the news when it comes to outbreaks, when it comes to the availability of vaccine, etc. And if you have not been vaccinated, and you are eligible to be vaccinated, and you feel that it's a risk to be vaccinated, I'll say this: there is a small risk to being vaccinated. There is a much, much bigger risk to be unvaccinated. Please, if you're going to travel, get vaccinated and wear your mask.
Wonderful. Dice que hay que prestar mucha atención si usted está pensando viajar, sobre las restricciones, sobre la vacunación. Y lo último que él quiere decir, si no lo ha vacunado, si usted no se ha vacunado y cree que hay riesgo en vacunarse, el riesgo es pequeño al vacunarse, pero el no vacunarse trae con sí riesgos muy altos. Y también, una vez más, use sus mascarillas si es que va a viajar y tenga muchísima precaución. Mr. Todd Curtis, where can we read all your wonderful articles?
Well, you can find a lot of information about airline safety and security at my website, airsafe.com.
Airsafe.com se llama su sitio web. Ahí usted podrá obtener muchísima información acerca de todo lo relacionado con viajes en aviación. Mr. Todd Curtis, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
For more information on airline safety and security, please visit airsafe.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.